Hi everyone, I'm Rachel Friend, a new red badge person. Really happy to be here and introducing today our speakers. The City of Boulder is at a financial crossroads, and those roads have a lot of potholes. To meet our infrastructure needs, come on Chris, a little laugh at that. City Council has referred to the November ballot a new $400 million bond to be paid for by a new property tax increase. Voters, you all will have the final say. Here to advocate for the bond, or at least the facts of the bond, is Deputy City Manager Chris Meschuk. Chris was acting city manager during part of my tenure on council, and he carries in his wallet a city staff badge from those old school, like high school yearbook printers. That is how long he's been with the city. I don't know if he can show you that badge today. And he has the deepest institutional knowledge of the City of Boulder, in my opinion, of anybody currently working at the city. Here, cautioning against the bond is former City Council member Jan Burton. Jan once advised me, your policy votes are important and critical, but the budget is always the linchpin. Jan has gone over every city budget with a fine-toothed comb for at least a decade and is a longtime advocate for sound governance practices. So we will have 10 minutes for each side to present and give their presentations, and then 15 minutes of questions and answers. Let's go.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for the opportunity to come and speak about an upcoming ballot measure that you are all going to have the choice to vote on. As Rachel mentioned, quick disclaimer, as a city employee, I cannot advocate for or against a ballot measure, so I'm here to present to you information and facts only on the recreation and safety bond. So real quick, 2 quick slides, how it works. This would be a bond measure that would allow the city to borrow up to $400 million to do work on capital infrastructure projects specifically related to city facilities. This is part of the city's long-term financial strategy work to try and find ways to address the unfunded needs of our community. This bond would be paid for by an increase in property taxes that would be for up to the amount the city borrows, and then once that bond is paid off, the property tax goes away. If it doesn't pass, there's still needs in these buildings. There is still work that needs to be done. We would repair the most critical things. We would do that by either lowering services, adding additional fees, or delaying other projects. But the overall needs still don't go away. So that deferred maintenance and that long-term replacement need or upgrade need, unfortunately, will continue to escalate. So now let's get into the more details. What are we trying to solve here? And so let's go on a bit of a journey. The city has been working on a long-term financial strategy the last couple of years. It builds actually on decades of work that began coming out of the recession with what we call the Blue Ribbon Commission reports of 2008 and 2010. That really addressed revenues and expenses. We addressed a bunch of recommendations in those reports, but some of them remain unaddressed. And the real challenge is 2 themes. The community wants and needs outpace our available funding. And then the second is that the cost to deliver services as a city is starting to outpace our revenues. And so we're working on trying to address that mismatch. It's a priority of the City Council. And this bond measure is one of the tools to try and address the city's needs. One of the questions that we've heard is, well, what is the city doing to tighten its belt? And so I wanted to share a little bit about, in recent years, what we've done with the budget. In 2025, it was about the middle of the year that we realized with the adjustments in property tax that we were going to have a budget gap. So we closed an $8 to $10 million budget gap in the middle of 2025 through a hiring freeze and a reduction of 5% of our operations budget. At the same time, we assembled the 2026 budget that included a $7.5 million shortfall that resulted in a reduction of the city's general fund of 7.8%. And we're just finishing assembling now and putting together the recommended budget for 2027, where again, we will need to address a $6.5 million shortfall. So now let's talk about buildings. So rewind, City Hall was located at 14th and Walnut. That's where the Colorado building is now, the big tall tower in downtown. In 1951, we completed the Penfield Tate II Municipal Building, which was the city hall for the city, expanded in the 60s. And then as the city continued to grow, we continued to acquire buildings. We got to over 50 of those by the turn of the century. We now own over 75 buildings that are operational buildings. We have about 600 structures. But we manage about 1.9 million square feet in operational buildings for the city. That's a lot. And the average age of those buildings is just nearly 50 years old. And one of the tricky challenges is that buildings start to age, especially as you hit that kind of 25 to 30-year-old portion or time frame, I should say. Things start to get more expensive. That's when major systems in buildings start to need to be replaced, HVAC systems, boilers, that sort of thing. And so, unfortunately, we've got a lot of old buildings in the city's portfolio. And so, the challenge with that is that we spend about $11 a square foot on maintenance in our buildings. The industry standard is $5. And that's because we have a lot of failing systems in buildings. We're trying to fix things or repair things, some of which we're having to manufacture parts because the system isn't even on the market anymore, that sort of thing. And so trying to figure out how do we address that and get back to a more sustainable and more efficient way of managing the city's portfolio. And in 2020, we made a structural shift in the city of we brought all of our buildings under one department. Prior to that, each department in the city managed the buildings that they were housed in. So we created a facilities and fleet department. The idea being, let's have building professionals manage buildings. And in 2021, the City Council adopted its first citywide facilities plan to try and figure out how to address all of the unfunded needs in our facilities. There's two key initiatives: maintain well. So that is taking care of the buildings that we have. A key initiative of that is putting away 2% of the replacement value of the building to save up for those big system replacements. We've started doing that on our new buildings, but our existing buildings that have lots of deferred maintenance need a lot of work. The second one is around consolidation. And so consolidating city facilities, not having so many buildings, creates some opportunities for cost savings, for more centralized locations for providing our services, as well as obviously more efficient collaboration with our city staff. And so the first step of consolidation is being achieved at what we call the Western City Campus, which is at Alpine and Broadway, the former Boulder Community Health site. And that facility, we're going to combine all departments except for our fire and police department into one location. We're going to have a single one-stop shop for our community to get services from the city. We're also going to then vacate 10 buildings as a part of that. That's part of that key consolidation strategy and reducing our building portfolio. That project is fully funded and that building will open next year. The other thing that we did is we did a deep dive, in our recreation centers. So in 2024, we looked at what's the future of recreation? How do we want our indoor recreation centers to function? In the center of this graphic, which is a summary of our engagement, we see that there are really three key things our community wants in all of their recreation centers, which is lap lanes, expanded gymnasiums, and improving services for children and youth. So that brings us to this bond measure. What this bond measure would fund is 5 categories of facilities. Recreation centers, we would replace the South Boulder Recreation Center with a full-service recreation center, including a pool. And we would renovate the North Boulder Recreation Center. As a part of that, we would move and co-locate the Agewell West Center, which is currently at 9th and Arapahoe, to our Agewell Center, or to our recreation center. And that is similar to the East Boulder Community Center, where we have a recreation center and an Agewell Center co-located there. We would remodel 2 of our fire stations. And we would have a new facility for our police department and our 911 dispatch center. That building is the worst building in the city's portfolio. And then the last is around some of our operational buildings. You'll hear a term sometimes people refer to, the Eastern City Campus. It's the other strategy in our consolidation plan. That's the Municipal Services Center out on Pearl Parkway. We want to consolidate all of our operational facilities spread throughout the city there. And then there would be a remodel of the Penfield Tate, the second municipal building. So what's the cost to taxpayers if this bond measure were to pass? If the city borrows money. It would be paid for by an increase in property taxes. A bond is essentially a low-interest loan that governments can use. If you have a home in the city, a residential property that is valued at about $1 million, the increase to your annual property taxes would be about $400 a year. One of the things that the city has put on its website is an interactive map. You can type in your address and see if the city were to borrow the full amount of $400 million, what your property taxes would change. If this bond measure passes, we would not borrow all the money at once. We would probably do it in 2 or 3 chunks. The property taxes won't change until we borrow the money. So your property taxes won't change the first year. It'd probably be between next year and 2030 that the property taxes would actually change. And the second last slide here. If you want to learn more about the city's facilities, we have an interactive webpage called a story map on the city website, where you can learn more about what we've been doing, what the needs are related to city facilities, as well as what the bond measure includes. We also have a webpage on the city website that includes all information, details on each of the projects, what the city is looking to do, why it's needed, and so welcome you to check those things out as well. And with that, I'm going to wrap it up and pass it over to Jan.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for having us. I'm going to talk a little bit about why we would recommend actions before taxes. We feel like clearly there is a need for assistance with deferred maintenance, but we're not ready yet for a tax. Again, like Chris has said, this is a $400 million tax. We have 75 buildings in the portfolio, or the city does, but this tax is only aimed at 7 of the 75 buildings, and the total cost would be $650 million. So in addition to the ordinance asking for a tax increase, there is also an ordinance asking for an increase in the debt limit, which is quite substantial, and we will have to vote on both of those issues, and we need to understand them both. So there are 4 reasons why I feel it's not prime time for the ballot yet. Number 1, the city has not funded its own plan, and the plan that Chris talked about, which is the facilities master plan. Number 2, we don't feel like the analysis was really done, a deep analysis that we can all understand as voters. Next is the voters are not sold on this. And finally, the bill falls very hard on small businesses. So for the degree of tax that we as individuals pay, small businesses will pay 4 times that. And that's very real money to businesses that are already struggling with the cost of labor and inflation and other things. The facilities master plan that Chris talked about, I think is actually quite impressive. I've spent quite a bit of time with it over the last couple of weeks when I understood that it really existed and I needed to understand it. And in the plan, they recommended a budget of $11 to $12 million per year to do deferred maintenance on buildings, but they have not funded that. So the green bars show the actual funding in the budget, and the bar on the top shows what the amount was supposed to be budgeted. Now, I actually, at Chris's urging, I sat down with his team yesterday and asked some questions about what had happened. And what I learned yesterday, which is still mysterious to me, is they are only budgeting deferred maintenance on new buildings. New buildings, meaning buildings that are less than 15 years old. So that means we're leaving everything else without a budget. And then when you look at the chart on the right, what that shows is the blue line is this new department, the cost of this new department that they created in 2021. That's good. But the exploding orange line, that's basically 1 or 2 buildings that has taken all the funding. It's the Alpine Balsam building, the old hospital building, as well as Fire Station 3. So we've just been shortchanging the 75 buildings. In addition, there were 2 consolidations promised that Chris mentioned in the plan. An east consolidation, taking a bunch of buildings and consolidating into one, and then the west. And what I learned yesterday is that the intent was never to consolidate the east until sometime in the future. It was in the plan, but it wasn't really in the plan. It was only, kind of in writing. So they need to have the money in order to do this consolidation. And then you look also, remember last year we passed a tax that is a sales tax called CCRS. It's the, Rachel help me, Community Culture, Safety, and Resilience Tax. Yeah, so we passed that. We've passed it 3 times now, at least. And that is meant to be for capital funding, for buildings and things like that. So you look at how the money is actually spent, and 51 million was allocated to the East Boulder Rec Center. There was allocations to 2 of the fire stations, nothing for the police station. And you do wonder what is happening with the prioritization of the CCRS tax. So we feel like there is a process that should be taken, that first you need to really kind of assess our facilities and using a criteria that would be quite standard in the industry. And the criteria that was in the facilities master plan was pretty crazy. The essential building was only 3% of the criteria, and a lot of other factors like how does the building feel carried higher factors. Next, number 2, to really build, I can't read that. Yeah, build scenarios. Number 3 is to reach consensus in the community and involve the community in this process. And then number 4 is really look at spending. That process has not been done. There has been, to their credit, I think quite a bit of process done on the rec centers through the Parks and Rec Board. So give them credit for that. But for all the others, for example, there's not been a community conversation about the police building, and it is billed at $170 million. So we believe that the process has been skipped here, and we need to be involved in the process before asking for money. So now, what was originally in replacement value, an estimate of 171 million, which I was told yesterday is not really a build cost. The costs now are $444 million for 7 buildings. So they're asking for 400 million, and they're saying that they will have to sell some buildings in order to actually fund the entire 444. So when you look at this, the number 1 item on the list, at one point the estimated replacement value of the police building was 52 million, but now they're asking for 170 million for that building in a new site, new location. Next on the list is the Municipal Service Center on the east side, which would consolidate some other buildings, which would be a good thing. And then you look all the way far to the right, and the Penfield Tate building is on there for $30 million. And this is a building that's not going to be used for anything except for city council meetings. So we're spending something like $200 million on Alpine Balsam, but they still want to keep the Penfield Tate and invest $30 million. That seems highly questionable. 3 minutes. So, 4 things the current city dashboard glosses over. One is that the amount is really $444 million when you add up the cost of the buildings that they want to build. And the bond measure is only for 400, so they'll have to do some justification on that 44 million. Number 2, the public safety building at 170 million. Municipal Services Center is now a relocation. And number 4 is the Penfield Tate building that I already talked about. Voters are not confused. Voters are skeptical. There was a survey that was done a couple of months ago by the city, a really well-done survey, and what they show is that the voters are doubtful about this. They're skeptical, and only 31% give it hard support. So it's very likely this bond issue won't pass. And again, as I said, the tax is the greatest on business. So when you look at the left, it shows you the amount per $1 million of property value. For a residence in blue is $401, but for a business it's $1,588 per year. And you might think that's not that much, but think about our very small businesses, the services, like physical therapists or hairdressers and people like that. That's very real money to them. And it means they will probably have to hire an employee to increase their revenue or lay off an employee if they can't pay this bill. So it's real. And in addition, it's stacking on top of additional things that have been passed in the recent years, like the library tax. And here's the thing that most people are not looking at is the debt stack. So if you look from left to right, it shows you the variety of taxes that the city has gone after to, with debt. So if this passes with this additional debt of $650 million stacked on top of everything else, will be $1 billion in debt. And that puts us substantially higher than the rest of the cities nationwide. So there are some things that council and staff can do first, and this is a list that you can take a look at. First of all, they should fund the 2%. They should publish a comprehensive analysis of the Alpine Balsam. They should provide a comprehensive analysis of those 7 buildings, which we have not seen yet. Educate the public on all electric, because that is one of the components that's driving up cost. List underused or surplus properties. Let's get them on the market. And then finally, set a regular public schedule of deferred maintenance reviews. So the need is real. The trust has not been earned yet. We feel like it's a $1 billion bailout. And so we would love to see the city do some of the actions that we've requested before we vote on it. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Kathy Olivier, and I have a question about what are the consequences or what is going to happen to the recreation centers if we don't pass this? What kind of services are we going to start to miss?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So we have 3 recreation centers, north, east, and south. And each of those recreation centers has a mix of services. Each of them has a pool. One of the really interesting things about owning pools is they're really expensive. And I have learned they're really hard to keep the water in, actually, over time. And so pools are a main driver. If this bond measure doesn't pass, there are still needs that we need to do, like keep the water in the pools or fix the HVAC systems. Those are the things that we'll have to fund just to keep the rec centers open, or we'll have to start closing the doors. So those are the things that we would focus on. Any of the upgrades or enhancements would be things that would then have to be deferred. If there are major catastrophic failures that happen at one of those facilities, there is the chance that that facility would then have to close until we figure out a future strategy. So we were able to infuse some capital money into the South Boulder Recreation Center to buy us 5 or 7 years to continue to keep that facility operational. The sewer line is still a little iffy, but we're going to keep our fingers crossed on that one. So there are some risks there if it doesn't pass. We'll obviously prioritize and do our best to keep those facilities as operational as possible.
I'd like to answer too, and that is that I really believe that rec centers are very important, and the city has done a great job with rec centers over the years. The tax that I referred to earlier, that acronym CCRS, Community Culture, Safety, Resilience, there's still a lot of money left that has not been planned for the city. a lot, hundreds of millions, maybe 100, I don't remember, 144 million left. Why not use that for the South Boulder Rec Center? So there is money out there that we've already passed. That is a sales tax, not a property tax. So let's have a good view of how that tax is going to be used and maybe reprioritize that.
Thank you both for coming and for explaining this complex issue to the club today. I kind of have a compound question. First, you mentioned that there are 75 buildings, 10 of which are going to be consolidated when we build where the hospital used to be. And there are 7 buildings contemplated within this tax. What are we looking at down the road for additional kind of costs and taxes to maintain what I guess would be an additional 65 buildings or 60 or 57 buildings? That's one. And then 2, can you explain the difference between the estimated replacement value and the cost? Because I feel like maybe we're missing something there.
Thanks for that question. I'm going to try and simplify the building answer, but that interactive story map does a great job of laying out and explaining all those different facilities. Of that entire portfolio, we prioritize the portfolio. There are certain facilities that are specific to certain functions, like utility plants that have funding that is through your utility rates. So those are taken care of with that. There are other facilities that
last time.
we
So I just need it for
have in decent condition that are in pretty good shape.
It's
When
James Bond
we
007.
prioritized that list, it came down to 15 critical buildings that we needed to figure out how to solve. They were also some of the most expensive ones. Through the work that we're doing of consolidation and moving things around, the final 7 that came to the list for consideration of the bond, if the bond measure were to pass and we were to move forward with those projects, that addresses the gap. The need we have is about 500 million total for our facilities. We have 100 million that is already funded that we can cover, much of that through CCRS that Jan was just referring to. If this bond measure passes, it addresses the majority gap. Your question about, well, what the heck about all those other buildings? The existing replacement funding that right now we're putting into emergency repairs in a bunch of these facilities, we'd be able to redirect that to taking care of the rest of those buildings, and existing funding could address those. So that's the basics on that. And then we had a good conversation about this kind of difference that Jan pointed out of CRV, current replacement value, versus what's new construction cost. And there's a couple of factors there. One is CRV, or current replacement value, is essentially what's the value to put the building back exactly the way it was that you put on your insurance. So that's kind of a mathematical calculation. What we actually use for that number is what the Boulder County Assessor's Office assesses the building at, because it's a standardized methodology. If we're going to replace a building, there are current needs that are necessary. So it may be that it's a little bit bigger, or it may be that we need to add square footage for things like ADA restrooms. There are square footage requirements for those that current restrooms don't provide. And so that's how I would describe what the difference is of why you see a new project cost and what it would cost versus what that current replacement value number is.
And Chris's team tried to help me understand that yesterday, because I did not understand that either before I met with them. We were looking at the current replacement value as, well, that ought to be the cost, right? So, but one of the questions that I had for the team yesterday, and will continue to ask, is, if you look at low, medium, and high, we always seem to stretch for the high. So the police building at 170 million, isn't that a bit of a head shaker? And 30 million for Penfield Tate, when it's only going to be used for city council meetings? What would need to be done for $30 million? So I think that's one thing, and the city always says that it's the community's wants. It's us who want and need these things. And I think that's true. I think we often communicate that that's what we want. But we don't see the trade-offs, right? When we say we want to be absolutely the best in terms of environmental factors, that we never see, okay, what that means is if we rip out natural gas all over the city and put in electrification, what is the additional cost of that? And now we're seeing it in the high numbers, but we never see the details. And that's what I think this community needs to ask for, is more details. And then I would ask one more question, because you said the total need would be 500 million, and we're asking for 400 million on just this bond issue. So that means there's only 100 million left for the other 69 buildings? That doesn't, I think that's what doesn't compute. And how are we going to get to that money if we're already $1 billion in debt? How are we going to take care of the rest?
Chris, you mentioned at the very beginning the change that took place going into 2025. Just for our overall view, and perhaps this is systemic, but some of the causes of the imbalance, and are they continuing as you project that?
Appreciate that, and to share a little bit of what are some of the drivers of why is there this expenses exceeding revenues challenge that the city budget has. There's a few things that are all kind of compounding together. One is sales tax in the city is pretty much flat right now. So there is an additional sales tax revenue coming into the city. The second is over the last few legislative sessions at the State House, the way property taxes are calculated and work has adjusted. And so the amount of money that the city is receiving through property tax has essentially gone down. And then if you flip to kind of the other side of the ledger from revenue is expenses. There are certain things that costs continue to go up for. So whether that's the cost of labor, whether that's the cost of certain services, things like even fuel, are all factors that those are for some of them fixed costs that we can't control. There are other things that are expenses that we can control that then we can make reductions. And we have tried to do that by not impacting services as much as possible. But we're at a point where it's going to start to reduce services in certain areas. Or what a lot of cities do is where do you make your biggest reduction? You make it in capital. You can reduce how much you're funding capital, and you can put that towards operating. And that's a short-term solution, but it creates long-term problems. So naming that and saying, hey, let's make sure that we aren't setting ourselves up for struggles in the future. So many of those challenges in terms of flat sales tax, it's projected to kind of continue to be flat next year. Our hope is that based on a long-term projection in the economy, things will turn around a little bit and continue to go up. Property taxes on a new baseline, so we're working from that new baseline. And then we're going to do our best to continue to control costs, and we're going to all keep our fingers crossed that inflation stays at a reasonable rate.
I would say that our city council, who is our board of governance to represent ourselves to city staff, they need to get their hands a little bit more dirty in the budget. I think they think that's, a couple times a year they need to do that, but no, that's not right. I think when you see our back is against the wall, it is their full-time job to understand the details of the budget and to have forced conversations in this community about what we really want. What are the puts and the takes? So if we really want to have, a communications team with 33 people, then what are we giving up? Are we giving up pothole coverage? What are we giving up? So let's have some of these conversations. And I would also challenge the community to get involved. I remember when I was on city council, the budget meetings that we had where we were approving budget, no more than 2 people came and spoke. So it's just not in the, it's not in our purview as voters, but it needs to become in our purview, because look at the tax measure. It's a bit of a bailout. And, you know, there's enough blame to go all around. Let's not blame, let's fix. There are steps that can be taken, and that's what I would recommend, is that we look at how we can solve these problems as a community with our city council and with the staff.
This may be our last question.
So my name is Chris Parks. I'm a lawyer here in town. And Chris and Jan, thank you for this presentation. I got to tell you, listening today and not knowing that much background, I think, Jan, your arguments win to me, hands down. For Chris, for the city to have the idea that a lot of cities defer capital, so we'll defer capital, and we'll do operating and we'll defer these capital expenses. I'm not a property manager, but it sounds like we need to hire like a really good property manager who's dealt with capital expenses for a long time. For you to say that Alpine's fully funded and we're moving in next year and we own 75 buildings, but we're only selling 10, I'm just baffled. And so for me, not understanding this deep enough, just cut the funding. I mean, let the city figure it out. It's a complicated enterprise. There's a lot of money, a lot of moving parts. You both make really good arguments on both sides. But just from what I've heard today, I'm done. I live here in the city. I pay taxes. I pay dearly. And it's upsetting to hear some of the things that Jan has pointed out. Thank you for coming. I hope we can work this out. And Jan, I think the most instructive slide, the entire presentation, was the second to the last, where you listed what we should do. And I'm all for that. Thank you very much.
This will be our last question. Thank you.
I'd like to touch upon expand the comment you made about potholes. The city provides a whole bunch of services other than buildings and maintenance: sewers, sewer lines, clean water, hopefully, and filling potholes, road maintenance, and what have you. How are those things budgeted, and how are they affected by however one votes on this particular bond?
Thank you for that question. And real quick, I just want to clarify and appreciate the comments and the feedback. And I just want to make sure I wasn't misspeaking, to be clear. We're not proposing that we're going to cut capital to fund operating. That's what a lot of cities do. That's a bad idea. So we're trying not to do that and make sure that we don't make things even worse. The question about what about all the other city services, and you're right, the city provides 300 services, and that includes things like transportation and transportation maintenance, obviously utilities, making sure that you get clean drinking water and that the wastewater goes away and doesn't come back are really important things for us to make sure we do on a daily basis. Without getting super wonky into government finance, the city has 42 funds. Those are essentially, think of them as accounts, even though it's all in the same bank account. 67% of those are dedicated to specific uses. So there is a dedicated sales tax for transportation, for open space, etc. And so all of those different services get funded out of different funds. So open space is funded out of the open space fund. That's funded by sales tax. Transportation is funded by a combination of sales tax, and there's a bunch of federal funding that comes in for transportation. We also have what's being implemented now is what's called a transportation maintenance fee to be able to help maintain our transportation infrastructure. So lots of different things that we're making sure that we are funding. One of the things that I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation is the desire for what the city provides, or the level of service that we provide, and the available funding. There's a bit of a mismatch there. So we've started to try and have a conversation with the community around what are those trade-offs. And that's going to have to continue to be a conversation. But there are certain things as a city, as your city government, that we have to make sure function on a daily basis, 24/7. And that's an important responsibility that we have and one that we want to continue to provide.
It's a very hungry beer, the city. And I think sometimes the city decides all these things that they want to do, and it's not necessarily validated by public input. And I think it is, the staff members do a great job. I just think we have to do a better job of prioritizing, and I'm going to put in one more plug. There are about 10 of us in the community, including Leslie Dorgan, who is one of your members. We've been working to develop an idea for a new department, small, very small, that would report directly to council, and that's a performance auditor. And we see many cities across the country who are doing this, and this would not be a financial auditor, but an auditor of programs to ensure that programs are delivering what they are meant to deliver, that we have our eye on things like deferred maintenance. And I believe if we would have had a performance auditor, that person would have highlighted these deferred maintenance issues well before this year when we're being asked for $400 million. So that is something that we would really like the community to support, to ask the city council to put that small item into the budget to prevent these kind of problems in the future. And again, thank you all very much for your time.
Jan and Chris, on behalf of the club, thank you so much for your time and your presentation today. I think you've given us quite an introduction to the complexity around this particular issue. The details are of keen interest to those of us who are voters in Boulder, and I think you've also probably stimulated a lot of thinking for those who live in other communities about the challenges of prioritization and funding. Thank you. Thank you. In appreciation of your time and your presentation, in your honor, we will be donating 100 doses of vaccine to the polio eradication effort that Rotary has led for many, many years. Thank you. Thank you.
But wait, that's not all. So President Doug Rutherford is not able to be here today, but he wanted me to hand off to you what is like a Rotary speaker coin is what he calls it. It's got the founder of Rotary, Paul Harris, on one side, and then the four-way test, which is a great kind of a test about an ethics test, right, that Rotary uses. So thank you both very much for being here, and we appreciate it. Yes. Thanks.